Okay, and let's continue. So the ozone, we're just mentioning, there's a couple of interesting things. The magnetic field of the Earth has dropped quite dramatically since even the time of Babylon, which is around 300 years ago, the last of the Babylonian Empire, to current days. And now we have we have not only a decrease in the Schumann resonance, we also have a decrease because of industry, decrease of the oceans. For example, if you look at the dead zones in the oceans, there's 20,000 dead zones on the planet, some of them quite small, some quite big, where the benthic layer of the oceans are not generating oxygen anymore. 80% of the oxygen in the world comes from the benthic layer, which is the top 10 meters. We also have cut down more than half of the rainforests and the forests that provide oxygen. So as we deforest areas, as we destroy the benthic layer with toxic fuel, basically bunker C, etc., toxic pollution that's dumped at sea, we're generating the oxygen generation now. The oxygen cycle, to me, is in many ways more dangerous than just this so-called accumulation of greenhouse gases. And one of the greenhouse gases that they don't pay attention to is not just CO2, but the issue that's more important is methane. Methane hydrates releasing. It takes 6 months for them to break down in the upper atmosphere to turn into carbon dioxide. And methane has a far more, we call thermal resistance index to actually increase heat. So we're not only having some wild fluctuations in the heat generation on the planet, and ozone actually is a greater, if you want to call, destroyer of ice, like icebergs, and of the Greenland ice sheet, and calving off of even places like Antarctica, where the ice sheet is increasing, and by quite a big margin. In the northern hemisphere, it's the opposite. The northwest passage is open, so the whole world is under a great deal of stress, if you would call it. And as the oxygen levels drop, the ozone layer is going to have bigger and bigger holes in it, and of course these holes and the ozone will also put more stress on the upper benthic layer of the oceans, which could further cause a collapse in the oxygen generation, because the phytoplankton in the upper 10 meters are sensitive to radiation from high energy light, ultraviolet light. So it could feed into itself and make it even worse, is what I'm saying. What do you think of those theories? Hello, Ann?
That is, the Arbor Day Foundation will send you 10 bushes or trees, whatever you want, if you just make a small donation of $10. And they are encouraging people to plant trees and bushes because they want more foliage planted so that we can get more oxygen. In addition, at my church, we have maybe, I'd say, 5, 6, 7 acres. The city has said that we have to plant 100 trees. So there is government and private resources that are trying to get us to realize that we need to replace the trees, that as many trees as we can. And they are even encouraging farmers to grow a cover crop. They used to just go in and plow up their wheat stubble in the fall and leave the ground fallow because they thought that the rain falling on it and then the snow was good for the soil. But now the USDA is encouraging them to grow like clover, things that release nitrogen in the soil so they don't have to buy so much nitrogen. You know, they buy anhydrous nitrogen to fertilize their crops. But if they just grow clover in the winter, then the clover will fix the nitrogen in the soil. It takes the nitrogen out of the air and fix it in the soil. And those are called legumes. And I planted some legumes here. I call them purple crown. And they make a nice purple flower in the summer when everything else is starting to die of drought. And they do fix the nitrogen in the soil. But in addition, I do quite a bit of tree planting around my property too. I only have a quarter acre, but even if you just plant some bushes or trees, you know, then you can help add ozone to the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's really important. I think that people need to take an approach of restoring the benthic layer of the oceans. One of the things I'd like to see is seeding the oceans with the minerals from the Dead Sea, because those 14 trace minerals will massively increase plant growth, and plant growth will increase what's called the speed of the carbon-oxygen cycle. And right now in some of these big cities, I don't think people realize that if you get the oxygen under a certain percentage at, say, sea level or above sea level, some of these places like in South America are pretty high altitudes, you're going to get anoxic brain dysfunction, and you're going to get violent behavior because the frontal lobes are very metabolically active right after the eyes, most metabolically active tissue in the body, and you're going to start seeing basically decorticate violent behavior because there's nothing to de-repress the reptilian violent brain. And so some of the behavior is a neurobiological basis that they're due to oxygen depletion in their big cities combined with bad nutrition that makes them not have the neurotransmitters to modulate behavior and the oxygen to keep the frontal lobes suppressing bad behavior. Executive action is called of the frontal lobes. So and we don't see that directly. People aren't talking about these things directly, that the stress on the planet can stress human beings and other biological systems, and also can increase the rate of mutation on the ground. It's now suspected that the thinning of the ozone will speed up the violent weaponized mutation of viruses and other pathogens around the world, even in the wild. The extra stress on the genetics will increase the rate of mutation to make more pathogenic organisms.
And we see that happening. Of course, we don't know if it's being created in the biolab or not.
Well, yeah, it can, but we're having both those effects where every nation on Earth can have the poor man's nuke, which is a biological weapon.
All right. Well, I want to encourage everyone to do that. And if you go up on the internet and search oxygen plants or plants that produce oxygen, you'll find some house plants. For instance, mother-in-law's tongue puts out more oxygen, and so I have a couple of those plants inside my house. Especially, I have one in my bedroom. And also, you can look at the list and decide if you want. Yeah. Like the spider plant, it puts out oxygen.
And one of the highest is chrysanthemums.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. But those aren't really house plants.
Yeah.
Okay.
When we look, what's the next area you want to cover, Ann?
Well, the northern jet stream, I have a graphic here. The northern jet stream is much smaller than the southern. And this is an orthographic projection of the western hemisphere. And you see the little green circle is where these data is in the lower left-hand corner.
Wow.
So you have the position, and then you have that that the jet stream coming into Southern California, San Diego, is only running at 88 miles per hour. Well,
wow. That's about a third or even more less than its normal velocity.
Yes, that was my point. I didn't write that down on here. I just assumed that you would be able to see that. Because when you go to nullschool.net and look at this graphic is animated. And you can actually see the flow of the jet stream. Now, how do you know? Well, at the top of the graphic, it says that it's wind at 250 HPA, and that's the jet stream level. And then it gives you where it came from and what projection I'm using. And then it gives you the date and time. You'll see that this was yesterday.
Right.
Okay. Wow. But the main, so there's two main things. One is that the northern jet stream has slowed way down. And the other thing is that its extent has diminished. It's tremendously smaller than the southern jet stream. Now, I'm not an astrophysicist. I can't tell you what that means, but it doesn't look good to me.
Well, what I would expect out of that, from little that I know, is that when the jet stream stalls, weather systems can stall and either superheat or supercool or create frontal boundary zones and cause extreme weather. So you can see more extreme weather arising when the jet stream is not moving the air systems around, like lensing to cause a massive increase in heat, or we call what's that term where you end up with a polar inversion, where you can get extremely cold weather that can occur at odd times in the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
We do have two systems that are stuck. One is Julia. It's stuck between North Carolina and Florida, and it's just staying there. It's not moving. And if you look at this map, you will see that there's no jet stream over it. There's nothing to move it. It just sits there and circulates.
Yeah, that's Tropical Storm Julia, which is on the coastal area of Georgia and South Carolina right now.
Right now. And now they have another invest area. It's not a low-pressure system, but it's like the moisture rising from the Gulf of Mexico, like it did 2 weeks ago when it dumped itself over Louisiana. And if you look at the Navy maps, the sea surface temperature, you will see that the Gulf of Mexico water is very, very warm. It's close to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And the other thing that you can look at are, where are the record temperatures? Well, they're in the Midwest. So we've got hot air, and we have a lot of evaporation from the Gulf of Mexico, and it's just staying there right now, because the other time when that moist blob of air went into Louisiana, there was a low-pressure system in eastern Texas. A low-pressure system rotates counterclockwise, so it was pushing that blob of moisture up into Louisiana, where it dumped, and it dumped on St. Louis and all sorts of places. So we had flooding here too, but we don't see that low pressure. We don't see it. So I don't know how big that blob of moisture will get. That moisturized air, that very moist air. But I'm beginning to think that the southern states of the United States are going to become tropical.
Yeah, and tropical means a lot of tropical pathogens moving up, including mosquitoes and vector-borne diseases like Chagas spirochetosis, which causes Chagas cardiomyopathy. Many bugs like West Nile virus are here regularly, but we're going to see more and more of yellow fever and other viruses that are typical of Central and South America.
Yes, and what I am suggesting is that everyone in the lower half, the southern half of the United States, that you should invest in a fogger. Get a fogger that has a dial. There's one out on the market that's fairly inexpensive, and it has 9 different positions. And with that, you can kill mold, or you can kill mites, or you can kill mosquitoes or flies. And in fact, the top setting is you can kill a gopher. If you have the right stuff in the machine, of course.
Wow.
So what it does is that it atomizes the air so that it's a fog. And it's when you see these pictures of people spraying the insecticide or the larvicide when they're walking around with a backpack, and there's a fog coming out of the nozzle in the machine.
Right. That's
a fogger. It really is like a fog. It atomizes the moisture in the air, and it carries the insecticide. It's fine enough that it will penetrate, so that you'll be able to kill those mosquitoes like the Aedes aegypti, which are very friendly mosquitoes, and will follow you into your home and propagate in a drop of water.
Wow. Another technology they can use that can be complementary to that is radionics, which does help to get rid of pathogens, and farmers use radionics all the time.
What is radionics?
You generate a standing wave frequency that can be negative to specific dialed-in pathogens, just like Rife technology was used to destroy viruses with specific harmonic resonant frequencies.
Yeah, but that wouldn't kill a gopher.
I know it'll control pests or viruses, bacteria and viruses and so on, but I don't know about gophers. I just know that radionics has been used by farmers to control a lot of other types of pests pretty effectively.
Yeah, that's true. But we want to kill the mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah.
Because they are the ones that are carrying the Zika virus.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I want to get through this climate that's changing before our eyes. And let's go down and look at the drought situation. Prediction, the National 7-Day Significant Fire Potential. This was out as far as Monday, the 19th of September, and you see that there are low-risk area and moderate risk in California and parts of Nevada. The rest of the country looks like it's pretty good, or they don't have any data for it.
Right.
And I have provided a legend that I annotated so that you can tell what those different symbols mean.
Yeah, it's amazing how long we've gone without rain here in North County, San Diego. We had a pretty good spring with lots of rain. It hasn't rained here in about 4 months.
Well, yeah. Actually, I have a comment on that, but let's go to Super Typhoon Rantis. I don't know if you heard about this.
Yeah,
it battered Taiwan.
That's the one, Maranti, M-A-R-A-N-T-I, right?
Yes. And it was called a super typhoon, just like Superstorm Sandy.
Right.
And it's the strongest storm of the year globally, so including the hurricanes. And it was the strongest typhoon to hit China in that area, the area that's close to Taiwan, since 1949.
Wow.
And it was a Category 5 typhoon, and they're talking about, well, maybe we need a Category 6. Now, that's part of weather climate change. They keep raising the scales. The UV index scale used to end at 10. Well, that was because they said if it's over 10, you're history. Yeah. But now we have clothing, we have materials that you can make clothing out that will protect you if it's over 10. And so the index scale was raised to 15. Now, even so, if you see that the UV index for your area is over 10, you should probably try to stay inside.
Right.
Okay.
In fact, one of the effects of a massive surge in ultraviolet light, even for a day or an hour, is the crops will all turn white. They'll be bleached out by the ultraviolet light.
Yeah, that's a good idea to remind people that it's not just humans. I mean, we're talking about your pets, we're talking about your children, and we're talking about your food. In other words, when was it? About 3 or 4 years ago, we could look out and we could see the burning on the tops of the trees here in the Midwest. And you want to keep an eye on that. Now, I haven't seen that this year, but I have had some anecdotal evidence from people who are complaining that when they go out in the sun, they can feel pinpricks.
I call it the stretched elastic effect. In other words, like you're playing as kids and you pull the elastic back and flick your friend. And it goes, oh, that hurts. It feels like that in specific points where parts of the nerve complexes are more sensitive in parts of the skin, and you'll feel like you've been flicked by an elastic. It's like a quick pinprick. It's not a funny sensation. It's like, like you just all of a sudden, and that's the ultraviolet light hitting those nerve fibers in your skin. They can also photoactivate drugs. Certain drugs are actually very dangerous to photoactivate, like, for example, what's called the DNA gyrase 4 inhibitor drugs. If you get exposed, you can actually develop a global myopathy by damaging mitochondria by photoactivating the PPAR gamma drugs that are in your skin.
Well, and it'll also make you blind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, nasty. Levaquin, moxifloxacin are the two drugs you should be aware of. If you take those drugs and go out in the sun, you are cooking your body and your DNA. And your mitochondria especially. Back in a moment with more science. You need to know that's running and controlling and putting our world in stress. Back in a moment with Ann Morrison. Let's continue. So, are we still talking about the Super Typhoon Maranti or other?
Yeah, let's finish up with Maranti. It was the third most violent typhoon on record. The third most violent typhoon on record, and so that's significant. It had sustained winds of 180 miles per hour and gusts of 281 miles per hour. You can't even imagine a gust of 281 miles per hour. At least I can.
That's hard to believe, isn't it?
They're thinking about increasing the range to a 6.
What kind of buildings can withstand that kind of force, or boats, let's say, in a harbor? I mean, that's crazy.
Well, and that's the reason that they might want to do that, because then the insurance companies will demand better building codes.
Right, and also they'd make sure that ships are in harbor in probably some special area that can be blocked off against wave surges or super high winds, because a velocity of a piece of debris flying at that speed can break up windows, but also break up much bigger physical things. I remember traveling through Oklahoma back years ago near Lawton, and they had a previous tornado, and they had a piece of one of their crops, and literally went through a telephone pole, and you could see it sticking out of both sides. We're talking about big telephone poles. Like, it hit it at such a high velocity that it actually stuck right through it, almost like a spear. It was crazy.
That is crazy. Well, we want to talk about the Louisiana flood. The floods overtopped the levees, and it just in Baton Rouge, and they destroyed 15,000 homes.
Yeah, that's the big Louisiana floods. And the funny thing is, they didn't put a name on it. They should have a naming system for these floods, because they don't. They have a naming system for hurricanes and tornadoes and so on activity, but they don't have for just a flood. This is literally a stationary weather system that sat over them, like ones that are have been sitting over the last few months over Texas. Just rain and rain and rain. I mean, like biblical rains.
Well, this wasn't a storm. There was no low pressure associated with it, and there were no winds associated with it.
Right.
It was just that the air had so much moisture in it from the Gulf of Mexico, and then the low was driving it north, and eventually it reached the dew point, and it just started flooding. So essentially, it was from the Gulf of Mexico into the middle of Louisiana, and I understand they still have 15 parishes where the people are still flooded. Now, there was disaster relief, and you can read about that online. I don't want to spend time here doing that. But I want to talk about the drought that we talked about earlier. And Oregon put out a notice that the conifer trees. Now, what's a conifer tree? Conifer tree is a tree that makes a cone, and you know about pine cones, right? Well, and so those are the trees that they're talking about. And for instance, along the Cascade Range and down into the Sierra Nevada, 51% to 100% of those conifer trees are damaged.
Wow!
I mean, yes. That's how bad it is. And even at lower elevations, we still have up to 50% of the trees damaged. And it's because of the drought. What happens is that the trees get weakened because they can't get enough water, and then the insects come along.
Right.
And so they have foliage loss, dead branches, dead trees, and tops of trees. And so
that increases the dust, which increases the danger of major forest fires, too.
Oh, yes. Now, what they want you to do, this is from the USDA. I'm just quickly going to read these. Plant native and local drought-tolerant species. And we have that endeavor going on here where I live. Don't thin stands during droughts. Oh, my goodness, that was a short one.
Yeah, that's a short segment before the bottom of the hour. It's about 4 minutes. We'll be back in a moment with Anwar Van Morrison. Stay tuned. Important scientific information. Back in a moment. To summarize, and I've said this now over the last year or so, if the drought continues, we're going to have millions of climate refugees, possibly up to as many as 50 million in the next few years as the drought continues. Now, part of the solution isn't just climate modification using our space-based Tier 1 science, which we have to modify weather systems in the jet stream, which we do have that technology already, but the primary water, which, by the way, Muammar Gaddafi was developing, and it was one of the reasons why I think they attacked him, because weather warfare is one of the moduses of the globalist control freaks. So they're purposely, this is my feeling, not only shutting down technology, which would be available, they should, like Muammar Gaddafi, 75% of the new water in Libya was oasis water from primary water deep inside the earth, and he had 10 drill rigs from a British drilling company that were drilling down 2,400 feet. When I talked to Paul Power from the Primary Water Institute earlier this year and last year, he just, this spring, released a well at 6,000 feet in Northern California that produced 1,000 gallons of water a minute by drilling at 6,000 foot elevation just a few hundred feet deep, but he knew where to look. If we start doing primary water and recharge the aquifers like Ogallala, which is a big one in the Midwest, if we move away from chemical to non-chemical fracking using microwaves and other technology that don't involve poisoning the aquifers with toxic chemicals and wastewater, we can not only have an oil industry, but we can also have clean and forests that don't die and crops that aren't being poisoned by fracked water. Right now, it's estimated that somewhere around 5 million to 15 million Americans are being exposed to fracked toxic water that's getting into their water supplies or in the local plants that they're growing. That's pretty serious, and it's likely to increase dramatically. And by the way, both candidates support things that I don't know about a clarification from Donald Trump, but he supports what we call energy independence, but they need to realize they need to choose the right technology so they don't poison our water and kill our aquifers. And we know that Hillary just is going to stick with the Democratic senators or Democratic state governors that want fracking so that their states can frack, as they say, so they can frack them right to hell. I mean, destroy the normal biosphere and the upper aquifers that support the forests and the crops. So, we got to think these things through, don't we?
Yes, we do. We definitely need the aquifers. Okay, I'm going to talk now about Zika. Some important information about Zika. I have the report from the CDC as of 2 days ago. And, it shows that Pennsylvania and New York and New York City and Florida and Texas and California all have greater or equal to 101 cases. And there's widespread local vector-borne transmission. That means that there are Aedes aegypti mosquitoes that suck the blood from somebody who's infected with Zika and then sucks the blood from somebody who isn't and give that person Zika.
Yeah, you're talking about a partial blood feeding mosquito that can jump from one to another as they hop. They actually can give the pathogen by re-bleeding and by re-sucking the blood, and it mixes with the other individual.
Yes, and that is occurring in Puerto Rico and, as we know, in Florida and in the U.S. Virgin Islands and in American Samoa, which is in the Pacific Ocean. Now, Florida, they admit to 43 locally acquired cases, and that means locally acquired by mosquito. And Zika, Florida's, is undercounting the number of Zika cases, locally acquired Zika cases. They want to hide the extent of the spread of the mosquitoes and of the Zika. And luckily, you can go online, and there's a daily Florida Zika virus tracker, which is in the MiamiHerald.com, and it's very, very important that you do that. They even show Zika cases which are not being publicized by the CDC as far away as Louisiana and Mississippi. So you might want to keep track of that.
That's good. We now have a question from one of our callers. Actually, maybe two questions. Jeff in Idaho, go ahead, and your question on Zika and thallium. Go ahead.
Yeah, the tetragen thallium released probably from U-235 from Fukushima. That's basically making probably thallium sulfate. The question I got is, Zika looks to be like a thallium-induced encephalitis, not a viral encephalitis. And there could be the issue that the thallium that's being either sprayed or, the trees are dying, the pine trees are being killed by chemtrailing because they make terpene penoxide that is used as an old homeopathic solution that one of the other RVN hosts has studied for the past 20 or 30 years. It's used on every continent. But
are you talking about spraying the trees with that, or is it made naturally you're taking about?
If you basically ozonate olive oil, the therapeutic compound is terpene penoxide, and that's essentially the pathway that I think that natural gum spirits of turpentine are. The long chain ozonate, I think, Dr. Siegel.
I'm an environmental physician and chemist, and I can tell you the terpenes, when it combines especially with trimelitic anhydrides, makes the most dangerous photoactivated pollutant on freeways, especially in the northwest United States with a lot of forests. There's a lot of terpenes that are ambient in the air, photoactivated, and then combined with trimelitic anhydride diesel fuel exhaust.
Right.
The Zika virus by itself is neurotoxic. Mike Adams over at Natural News is unqualified to make statements as just to the pesticides. The pesticides are also extremely toxic, both geno and neurotoxic, and Fukushima is toxic. In fact, we're way down south. We're about 50 miles from the Mexican border or less, and my radiation detector varies between about 17 to 18 units when it's basically low radiation to 60, mid-60s. So it means we're still getting surges of radiation. Most radiation from my studies and the people who have reported to me is probably between 25 and 35,000 feet. So it's not coming into the coast, and at least in the air mass at the lower altitudes, it's higher. But when it precipitates along the Midwest and the storm tracks, it's coming in snow and rain. So what we're having is a constant drip, drip, drip of radiation from Fukushima, but most of the nuclear reactors in America are leaking tritium, thorium, and other isotopes. They're all post-geriatric. They're not being managed. If you take radiation detectors, you can go at 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 kilometers, and you can see rates of disease like small Tate's babies, dementia, cardiac arrhythmias, atrial fibrillation are directly correlated from distance from nuclear reactors. So there's a lot of environmental issues all converging here, including these pesticide sprays, and it's no wonder the people are freaking out because they're already dropping these sprays without a public alert to stay indoors when they're doing it and have proper air filtration systems so they don't get toxically exposed. The government's sloppy and people are sloppy. It's bad.
Well, what I'm saying is if you combine with the thallium with this sulfate and any of the things coming from Fukushima that are like tritium, what I'm saying is that may make the thallium so much more active and then pump the virus.
Co-toxicity, yeah.
Right, that's all I had.
Yeah, that's right. That's quite true. Co-toxicity and that's why we have high rates of BOF, brain on fire in children. We call ADD, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorder or Asperger syndrome. And why we're getting higher rates of dementia, cardiac arrhythmias, for example, the rate of heart failure, which is mitochondriopathy. Doing a scanning electron microscopy in the mitochondria of the blood vessel walls or heart, you'll see that people that get heart failure basically have mitochondrial failure. Their mitochondria look like the crystal galli are all screwed up, and there's a lot less mitochondria that are functional. If you do mitochondrial functional testing in a laboratory, it basically means we're suffering from the death of mitochondria that are causing not only dementia, which is type 3 diabetes, which is decreased mitophagy of old damaged mitochondria being placed with new good ones, and heart failure. Heart failure is mitochondrial failure, period. And radiation, ultraviolet light radiation, background, toxic pollutants, stacked vaccines, GMO foods all contribute to stress in mitochondria and mitochondrial dropout. So, yeah. Any comments, Ann?
Well, I want to thank Jeff for calling in, and that's a new word. I have to learn a new word, co-toxicity.
Yeah, and I'll also just check out Ann's website and do donate because she spends an amazing amount of work to put this material together. Please continue.
Okay, so we want, so the Florida officials have been accused of, they've stopped providing detailed information on the epidemiology investigations into the local Zika infections. They've refused to identify all the locations where Zika-positive mosquitoes were trapped.
Why is that? Are you politicking the issue?
And they have underreported the number of local Zika infections in Florida by excluding anyone who is not a state resident.
Wow. So what they're doing is they're politicking the issue to not scare away tourists.
Yes, and that means that, for instance, there were at least 64 when the local Zika infections, instead of the 56 that were reported by the health department. So, they're, 10% low? That's not good.
Yeah, they're playing politics like Obama plays politics with everything. Everything has to be politically and scientifically correct. Like they say politically correct? Or, yeah, I would call this scientifically correct behavior.
Oh, that's bad. Okay, then let's go on. The FDA has expanded the emergency use authorization for Hologic's Aptima Zika virus assay, and they can to include its use with urine samples. Now, the important words in this sentence are emergency use. It has not been approved. This drug has not been approved by the FDA, but they can use it, for instance, at airports or wherever they're doing screening of people who are coming into the country. And they finally decided that Zika lasts in the urine longer than it lasts in the blood. So they're going to use it to test the urine of people. Now, I don't know how you do that at an airport, but I'm sure that they will come up with some way of doing that.
What you do is you do a chain of custody with an observed urination specimen, and then you actually...
Well, most people won't do that.
Well, I think that means they're going to be detained for a period of half an hour to an hour to make sure that they can urinate under observation, which means you need a lot of staff to track people to make sure that they drink adequate fluids to create a urine sample.
Okay.
Well, we see the government moving more and more, and especially if Hillary gets in, she'll weaponize the Center for Disease Control and Homeland Security to the point where you won't be able to travel without showing your biometric papers, please. And you have to submit to saliva, urine, and blood tests, just like they do in Colorado now. If you're driving under the influence, they don't just want a breathalyzer, they want a blood sample to look for prescribed medications and toxic metabolites. It could indicate you're under the influence of something other than just even illegal drugs, conventional drugs, or have a medical problem. So, your privacy will be out the window completely because they're bringing in policies step by step. They're going to take away the last remnants of any autonomy. Some of it makes sense because you've got a real serious super pathogen and they aren't properly screening. So really, the sieve effect, which means almost nobody that could be a potential carrier is being picked up early at the point of entry into the country, either airports, seaports, or buses. So I don't see our public health screening system working at all. I think it's completely useless.
I can see a spit test, but I can't see a urine test. Anyway, the Zika virus assay was authorized for emergency use with serum and plasma, which are both blood samples, in June this year. Right. But its new use with urine samples lengthens the time period during which patients can be tested for Zika from 7 days, that's 1 week, to 14 days, that's 2 weeks, following symptoms. Uh-huh. And, that's a good deal. But the other thing is that it says only people who have symptoms. Did you catch that?
Yeah, well, that's only 1/5 of them, right?
1/5 of them. Following symptoms. 14 days following symptoms. Well, what if you don't have symptoms? Well, then you don't get tested. And that's 80% of the people.
Why don't they turn it around and use saliva and test everybody?
That's a good idea. That's a great idea. Why don't they do that? I'll have to remember that.
Yeah, and PCR can measure it very quickly, PCR testing. The other test, by the way, that they could screen that would be very quick is to use the metapathy with Hunter. It actually picks up the bioresonance of any pathogen. It can tell you within seconds. It was developed by the Russian Space Agency. I have one here right on my desk, and we're setting up these clinics, like the one in New York with PPRDI under Jim Gersey. and you can scan for a pathogen in someone's body, and it tells you precisely what the pathogen is from its bioresonance signature.
All right.
Pretty cool, hey? Yeah, it'll tell you everything. It'll tell you if you've got amoeba in your tooth abscess. It'll tell you which pathogen you have in your gut, or if you've got pyelonephritis, it tells you precisely the bioresonance signature of the pathogen. And it does it instantly.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really,
I
really
can hardly
good.
wait for you to get it on the market.
It is. I mean, it's just a matter of people, if we had these at entry points and we had it tuned to specifically look for that pathogen, we could just take a second, and all you have to do is put headphones on and press a button, and boom, if it's present, then the next thing to do is do a saliva test on everybody coming in to see if the PCR is positive. So if your bioresonance and your PCR tests are positive, you should go, quote, into a place of quarantine, and then we should try to use antipathogenics like our Allicin Med, Nutridyne, and Silver 100, and NutriDefense, which shuts down the entry of viruses into tissue, and then make sure someone is PCR negative before they're released back out in the public.
All right. Well, that brings us to our last subject, and there is a proposed rule by the Health and Human Services Department, that's HHS, and that was issued on the 15th of August this year, so about a month ago. And it has a comment period, has a public comment period that ends the 15th of October, the 14th of October this year. And it's amending its domestic quarantine regulations.
Yes, I read about that, and wow, that's scary stuff, isn't it?
This is scary stuff, and I want to briefly go over it this week.
Yeah, let's do that. We'll do it right after the break. We'll come back in a few minutes, and we'll talk about it tomorrow when we do our video. Amazing. Back in a moment with Ann Morrison. You need to know this stuff. It's going to affect you. A pathogen like Zika, or the effects of the so-called treatment by the government that are inappropriate, which are inappropriate spraying of toxic, neurotoxic, genotoxic sprays. Then we have the CDC rule. Go into it, Ann, because when I read this, I got, whoa, this is an OMG moment, isn't it?
This is an OMG moment. They do not mention Zika in this at all, but they do allow Zika to be added to the list by several groups, including the CDC, the HHS, and WHO. So that's what they're doing is they're amending the 2005 proposal to make it possible. For instance, they used to say that an individual could have a provisional quarantine and for 3 business days. Well, 3 business days can be 5 real days.
Yeah, because the weekend could happen, right?
Yeah, because weekends and holidays can happen. And so they're going to take that out anyway. And they think that they can get a written order for quarantine, isolation, or conditional release within 24 to 48 hours of apprehension. Apprehension now is being used instead of the term provisional quarantine. Apprehension, well, what does that mean? That means that anybody can apprehend you. It's not just health officials. They're going to use security services of one kind or another.
Yeah, private or public police, whatever. Most likely expanding Homeland Security and pairing it up with, the CDC.
Right. Now, in response to the Ebola scare, they began in 2014. They began a new enhanced entry risk assessment, and I think you might remember that.
Right.
They implemented this at 5 United States international airports, and these airports received approximately 90% of the travelers from Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. So that means that 10% of those travelers from the Ebola endemic areas were not getting this enhanced entry risk assessment. But they did at New York John F. Kennedy, Washington Dulles, Newark Liberty, Chicago O'Hare, and Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson. And they've also had since 2007 a do not board list. So they cannot, so that commercial airlines would not let you board if you were on their list. So they think that if they have, oh dear, we'll have to do this next week too.
Yeah, we'll do it, and we'll do a lot more in our video too. We aren't restricted by time.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. What this means basically is the government is going to turn the control of pathogens into in a sense, a pathogenic control police state. How's that? And they'll probably do it in a sloppy and ineffective way as well, missing people that really are carriers and controlling people that are under suspicion without, comprehensive testing. And do they have the quarantine facilities, etc.? No, they don't.
No.
Back in a moment with hour number 3, our firing line, questions on wellness issues, and our video will be tomorrow with Ann. Take care. We'll be back in just a few minutes.